Right, welcome everyone. We're going to be looking at youth and education in Nazi Germany. And today we're going to be looking at what it was like growing up in Nazi Germany, particularly what it would be like being a young boy in the Hitler Youth. So the image we see on the screen, we're going to start to think about what this can tell us about the devotion that these young boys had to being a member of the Hitler Youth in and around 1935, 1936. And you can just take a look at the expression on their faces, their posture, how they're standing. And it's not just one boy, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of boys who feel the same way towards Hitler in Germany. Got five key words today. We're looking at Reich, Heil Hitler, Nazi Teachers League, Aryan, and Hitler Youth. Reich is a German word. There's no kind of real direct translation to English, but it kind of means like state, kingdom, empire, those sorts of words. Heil Hitler was a Nazi salute, and it was quite common for civilians to use this as well, not just soldiers. So if you were over having dinner at someone's house, before you say goodbye to them, hi, goodbye, good night, Heil Hitler, on your way out the door. The Nazi Teachers League was set up to promote Nazi beliefs and values within schools, and teachers had to swear an oath to teach Nazi values. 3% of teachers didn't. They decided to quit teaching because they didn't agree. 97% of teachers took the oath and continued to teach in schools. Aryan is being a pure German. Again, if you need any information on that, you can go back to our previous lesson about racial policy. And the Hitler Youth. In German is Hitler Jungen, which is literally Hitler Youth. This was a club for young Germans, again to encourage those Nazi values. So young people in education, the Nazis realized that they could mold and develop young Germans by changing the education system. And to do so, the Nazis started off by actually rewriting a lot of textbooks to reflect Nazi values. As we said, the Nazi Teachers League teachers had to take that oath to promise to teach Nazi values to their students. And the curriculum was then changed to prepare Germans for their future roles as soldiers and mothers. We've got two images here. We have a girl who would be part of the German Maidens. That was like the girls' equivalent of the Hitler Youth. And she's having a look at some faces. Now, these faces, she's trying to pick out who was German and who was not. There was a book that was published called The Untermensch, something that was spoken about in our last video. Untermensch means subhumans. And these were people like Jews, gypsies, political opponents, communist people who weren't of the same caliber or purity as Germans were. And she's undergoing a lesson on how to pick out who was a subhuman and who was not. Our bottom picture here, we have some boys. So they're part of the Hitler Youth, and we can see that by their brown shirts, as well as their black ties, dark trousers, and they're all saluting. So they're learning a Nazi value, how to do the Heil Hitler salute in school. So looking at Nazi math questions, we're going to look at a rough example, then we'll look at an actual example from a textbook. Uh, but Nazis knew very clearly that they needed to make their lessons relevant and applicable to students' lives outside of the classroom. Many times we'll be sat in a lesson and think, "Oh, when am I ever going to use this in my life later on? It's not relevant to me, so I'm not going to pay attention." And the Nazis needed to change the delivery of their lessons, not only to teach the skills, such as addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, but also the life skills. Who is good, who is not, who should be favored in society, and who should be removed or eliminated. So you wouldn't see a question like, you have five apples and your friend eats one apple. How many apples do you have left? That's just addition. The Nazis wanted to slip in an extra lesson. So they might give a question like, you have five apples and a Jew sneaks into your home and steals all your apples. How many apples do you have left? So the subtraction element is still there, but they're learning a lesson about racial purity. So we have a question out of a Nazi textbook. So it says it costs 2,000 marks a year to take care of a disabled person. There are 100,000 disabled persons in Germany. How much money does it cost the Fuhrer Hitler every year? to take care of these disabled people. So of course you kind of do the multiplication. So we've got 100,000 people times 2,000 marks. So let's go do it the long way. So we've got a total of 200 million marks, and that's not the answer that the Nazis are after. The correct answer they're looking for is disabled persons should be euthanized or sterilized or sent to a concentration camp. They were not seen as desirable individuals to have in Nazi Germany because they weren't pure like the Aryans. So even though these students, yes, they're getting the multiplication aspect of the lesson, they're also learning that life lesson about who was good and who was not. So yeah, the answer is it would also save Hitler 200 million marks a year, but the more important lesson is about disabled people.
For all the importance the Nazis placed on the use of propaganda in influencing adult ways of thinking, young people were seen as the real key for the future success of Nazism. The phrase, "children are the future," is something you may have heard. The Nazis were very aware that if you could control the young people, they could control the future of Germany. There were two ways to achieve this: through schooling and through controlling children's free time. In this chapter we will look at how the Nazis used schools as a method of propaganda and tried to win the hearts and minds of young people across Germany. Bernhard Rust, the Nazi education minister, said, "The chief purpose of the school is to train human beings to realize that the state is more important than the individual, that individuals must be willing to sacrifice themselves for the nation and the Führer." From this quote, we can see that intelligence and the ability to think freely was not what the Nazis wanted. They wanted soldiers and mothers for a future Germany. As a result, much of the timetable at school was spent on physical education, around about 2 hours a day. Nazi ideas were present in every subject, and one of the most interesting things is that history took a central part in education. History, as taught in Britain today, is based around understanding different cultures, giving different interpretations, and giving causes for events in a balanced way. History in Nazi Germany was based on the idea that life is hard, the idea of the greatness of Germany was important, and that Jews were evil. These ideas were also spread among the other subjects. Primary school-aged children would learn to read stories that said how much they wanted to be like Hitler and loved him, and picture books showed Jewish people as dangerous men and women, hiding around corners. New subjects like race studies were introduced to get people to follow Nazi ideas. Physics lessons focused on weapons making, and biology focused on ideas of purity and race. The most blatant example of how propaganda was used in schools can be seen in mathematics, where questions were now presented in terms of Nazi ideas. One question asked, "To keep a mentally ill person costs 4 marks a day. There are 300,000 mentally ill people in care. How much do these people cost the government?" By solving this multiplication problem, the young people were also presented with the fact that mentally ill people cost quite a large sum of money to look after. The invisible and uncomplicated aim of propaganda can be seen in this simple maths problem. Education was also different for girls and boys. Girls took needlework, knitting and music, and boys took boxing. To make sure these ideas were taught correctly, teachers were forced to join the German Teachers' League, and children were encouraged to inform on teachers that went against Nazi ideas. One teacher made a joke and realized that it may get her into trouble. She told the children not to tell, but one did because they liked their old teacher better. She was interrogated and fired from her job. By 1937, 97% of teachers had joined the National Socialist Teachers' League, an organization created to make sure teachers taught in the correct Nazi way. So what was the purpose of education in Nazi Germany? It was, like all other forms of propaganda, a way of influencing people to follow a particular idea, in this case, Nazi ideals. If it were successful, there'd be less need for censorship in the forms of terror, also used to keep some Germans in control. Despite changing the education system, the Nazis also understood that not everyone follows what is said within schools. How could they make sure that this time outside school was controlled?
The Hitler Youth is the main thing that we'll be talking about. It controlled all aspects of children's lives. All other youth organizations and clubs were banned, and by 1939, it was absolutely mandatory that you were in the Hitler Youth. And it had roughly 7 million members. Now, boys went to Hitler Youth. They started this about the age of 10 until the age of 18, and they would look at athletic skills, hiking, camping. It was all about having fun with your friends during the Great Depression when you didn't have enough money to really do so. When you became older, kind of that 16, 17, you started doing more marching and military skills, and that was getting you ready to feed you into the military. Girls were members of the German maidens. They learned domestic skills, specifically preparation for marriage. They did have some military training, not a lot. Their skills were mainly domestic ones, so learning how to take care of a household and take care of children. Now, looking at the membership of the Hitler Youth and German Maidens, we can see from 1923 until 1939 uh, the total amount of people in the Hitler Youth and German Maidens. Now, there's a big change between 1932 to 1923. We can see there's a steady growth. We had 1,000, then we're up to about 6,000 by 1926. We've got nearly 100,000 members by 1932. So in 9 years, the growth was quite slow. Everything changes though when we get to 1933. Uh, we see another big change in 1937. So trying to think of the factors as to why in 1929 we doubled in membership, and then in 1932 to 1933 we went from 100,000 up to 2.2 million, and then the same thing in 1937 and 1938. Why we're seeing such a big growth? So ultimately, the Great Depression left people with very little hope. And when the Weimar government wasn't solving the problem of the Great Depression by 1930, a lot of people started to send their children to the Hitler Youth because they could get things at the Hitler Youth they couldn't get at home. New uniforms, a meal a day, a bit of fun, and it gave people that little bit of extra lift. And in doing so, also supporting the Nazis to gain more power to make more positive change in Germany. We can see in 1932 to 1933, we have a massive jump from 100,000 to 2.2 million, and that's pretty simple. Hitler becomes chancellor and he uses the Enabling Act to further push his laws. In 1937 to 1938, there was a lot more pressure on attendance for the Hitler Youth. 1939 is going to come compulsory. But in 1937 and 1938, Germany is in a period of rearmament. They're rebuilding their military, and people know that it's best to send their children to the Hitler Youth as a form of daycare when they're working at the factories, but also as military preparation for the war that people know is going to soon come. So there are two things that we want to flag up with this right away. And it's these two lines here: that I shall render unconditional obedience to Adolf Hitler. Unconditional means that there's no reason why I won't do what he says. And that comes from the context of the Great Depression. The Weimar government was not solving problems, and Hitler actually was. And we often regard Hitler as this evil man who did evil things, but in the early days before he took control of Germany, and even up until 1935, he was making a lot of positive change in the country. So people decided, I will do whatever he says because he's doing good things for me. And that I shall be at all times as a brave soldier, ready to give my life for this oath. It's very idealistic. It makes people feel part of something bigger than themselves. Many soldiers who took this oath did not give their life willingly. They actually surrendered to the Allies when they had the opportunity. It's not as though that they were willing to go on a suicide mission, but saying this oath does make you feel like you're part of something greater than yourself. So we've got three different oaths. We've got an oath taken by 10-year-olds entering the Hitler Youth, oaths for public servants, and again, the one that we just looked at, given by soldiers. And something that we want to flag up is what a 10-year-old would say in the last line. I am willing and ready to give up my life for him, so help me God. Again, we have to ask ourselves, does a 10-year-old actually understand what they're saying when they're saying, I'll do everything I can for Hitler. I will put all of my energy and strength into, the savior of our country. I love Hitler, and I'm willing to give up my life at the age of 10. Again, it's idealistic. It makes these young boys feel as though they're part of something greater than themselves. Oath for public servants, again, that I shall do my best to fulfill conscientiously all my official duties as a Nazi. No mention of giving up our lives here, and we can see again soldiers also with the theme of I'll give up my life if I need to.
Despite the general success of Nazi propaganda and censorship, there was still a lot of worry that young people might turn away from Nazi ideas. Education through schools was a very good propaganda tool, but what about when the young people left school at the end of the day and were with their friends? Would they really follow Nazi ideas? The purpose of the Hitler Youth was to make sure that outside the classroom, young people would also feel the effects of propaganda, and they would have no spare time to develop their own ideas. From the age of 6 to 10, boys joined the Pimpfen, or Little Fellows. From 10 to 14, they joined the Jungvolk, or Young Folk, and from 14 to 18, they became members of the Hitler Jugend, or Hitler Youth. Girls joined the Jungmädel, or Young Girls, from 10 to 14, and then the Bund Deutsche Mädel, or German Girls' League, from 14 to 18. Both boys and girls learnt Nazi-influenced songs and Nazi ideas and took part in camping and hiking activities. As the boys got older, they focused on marching, map reading and military skills. Girls kept up their fitness training as they got older, but they learnt domestic skills that would come in useful when they were married. From both examples, it's clear that Nazis were not only trying to make sure the young people followed their ideas, but also they prepared them for their roles they would take once they left the Hitler Youth, soldiers and mothers. In 1936, a law was passed which said that every young person had to join. By 1939, there were around 8 million members of the Hitler Youth. In the same way the Nazis wanted to control the leisure time of the children, the Strength Through Joy movement, or Kraft durch Freude, was created to control the free time of German workers. It tried to improve the leisure time of the workers and paid some of the cost of workers' holidays, hikes, sports, and visits to the theatre. 2 ocean liners were built to take workers on cruises. Despite the offers of cheaper holidays, many workers could still not afford them, and many of the places were taken by Nazi Party officials rather than ordinary workers. Once again, it was a propaganda exercise that helped increase the popularity of the Nazi Party. However, the greatest example of propaganda was the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. Used as an advertisement of German superiority, the Games were undeniably impressive. A brand new stadium was built that could hold 100,000 people. Television cameras covered events for the first time, and the Germans won 33 gold, 26 silver, and 30 bronze medals, far more than any other country. The Games showed off the superiority of Germany in terms of technology and physical skills, and visitors to Berlin were taken aback at the organization and the facilities available to them. Despite this propaganda victory for the Nazis, they had one small problem. The African-American sprinter Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals and broke 11 world records at the Berlin Olympics. Hitler refused to shake hands with a man who showed that the Aryans were not as superior as they thought they were. So, were the Hitler Youth, the Strength Through Joy movement and the Olympic Games all about propaganda? In one sense they were. They allowed the Nazis to reach into every part of people's lives, from the youngest to the poorest worker. However, there were 2 important groups missing: women and Christians. In the following chapter, we will find out how the Nazis tried to control them too.
Right now it's time for our bonus facts. The only after school club available was the Hitler Youth. As we mentioned before, all other after school youth programs were banned, and you had to take membership in the Hitler Youth. So this meant that football clubs, cricket clubs, everything was made illegal, and only the Hitler Youth was the only permitted club. The oath was taken really seriously, so we did look at an oath that young people would take before they entered the Hitler Youth, um, both by young people and old people and civilians as well. There were many people, as young as 10, 11, and 12 years old, we can see here on the left, and men as old as 60 or 70 willing to take up arms, especially towards the end of 1944, 1945, when Germany was on its heels and starting to really lose in the Second World War. And the German maidens did a lot more than just cook and clean. There were many who joined the Volkssturm, which was the People's Home Guard. And they did so in late 1944 and 1945 when the Allies were getting closer and closer to Germany, and there was a call for civilians to mobilize to help defend German borders. Right, so that's it for today. Make sure you check out the quiz on Show My Homework and complete any other tasks set by your teacher.